Who actually was St. Patrick? Well, this is the main image that we have of St. Patrick depicted in stained glass. He probably never looked like this. This is a much later sort of Catholic-inspired depiction of St. Patrick, and you can see there he's holding the shamrock, all right, the three-leafed clover, and it's often attributed to Patrick rather, the shamrock, right, the three-leaf clover, as regards to him talking about the Trinity. Now, it is true there is no evidence that he ever used the clover, the shamrock, right, in discussions of the Trinity. That's a much, much later attribution, right? It's also true that Patrick predates essentially things like the Nicene Creed, right, where things like the doctrine of the Trinity became probably more formally established. But as we were talking about with John and the rest of the team earlier, just because something isn't formally established doesn't mean it isn't truth. The reason it needed to become formally established is because people had actually strayed from the truth. So we need to actually write down and firmly establish, right, in written doctrine, what Christians believe. So look, what can we actually learn about St. Patrick? Well, is there any chance that he came from Judea, sort of from the area of the Jews, right? Well, what you can see is actually a map of the Roman Empire. Now, this is important because everybody who is within the Roman Empire, particularly those who are citizens of Rome, and that can be anybody who's free, basically, within the Roman Empire, could travel freely throughout the Roman Empire. So the fact that you can see over here, you've got Britannia, right? Up there near Carlisle is where we know St. Patrick was when he got captured by pirates and taken to Ireland. And right over here on the other side of the map, you've got Judea. So it is both within the Roman Empire. So there is a possibility, if you like to put it that way, that, or there is an option, right, for St. Patrick to have travelled from Judea over to Britannia, or at least from the line of the Jews. The problem is that there really isn't any evidence of this. You see, if you go to somewhere like Eboracum, which is modern-day York, right, you can find skeletons of people who've come from Babylonia, skeletons of people who've come from modern-day Sudan area, south of Egypt, and you've got people who come from modern-day Libya. So very dark-skinned people from all over the Roman Empire are found way up there in Eboracum. So there is a possibility. The issue is that there really is no evidence for it whatsoever. So who actually is St. Patrick, and what can we find out about him? What do we know about him for sure? Well, let's use his own words here. This is what he said in his declaration. So he was accused by a group of bishops on the continent, sort of the precursors to the Catholic Church, of really being not quite a heretic, but certainly they claimed that he wasn't doing enough for the organized church. And this is what he said in his declaration: "I, Patrick, a sinner, am the most uncultivated man, and the least of all the faithful, and I am greatly despised by many." Well, he seems like a pleasant chap, but then you got to remember who else said something very similar to this? The Apostle Paul. Right? He called himself the chief of sinners. There is certainly a humility about this man. So who was St. Patrick? Well, as far as we can tell, he was born sometime in the 5th century in Roman Britain, likely around Carlisle. So there you have the British Isles as it stands today. You can see you've got Scotland up in the top, you've got England, Wales, and then you've got Ireland. And Ireland is split into Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom, and the Republic of Ireland, or Southern Ireland, which is part of the British Isles. There's England, there's Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and the Republic of Ireland. Of course, it looked slightly different politically at the time of the Roman Empire. There's where modern-day Carlisle is, which is where Patrick came from. This is what Roman Britannia looked like in Patrick's day. And you can see it's really actually split into two parts. You've got the orange and you've got the green. The green represents the Celtic areas. The orange represents the place which had been taken over by Rome. So down here you've got Britannia, right, as part of where the Roman Empire was. Up in the north you've got modern day Scotland, which is where the Picts lived, the Celtic Picts. And over here you've got modern day Ireland, which of course is split into Northern and Republic, and that's where the Scots came from. So yes, it's kind of switched around, right? You've got the Scots living in Ireland, you've got the Picts living in modern day Scotland. It's slightly mixed up, but this is the picture of what it was like at the time that St. Patrick was alive. And this is what he continued to say in the declaration. He said, I was taken captive at 16 years of age. I did not indeed know the true God, and I was taken into captivity in Ireland with many thousands of people. So who was St. Patrick? Well, not only was he born in Rome and Britain, he was taken captive during a Scot raid, right? That's the Irish who'd come over, along with many others. And he said that there the Lord opened my mind to an awareness of my unbelief, in order that, even so late, I might remember my transgressions and turn with all my heart to the Lord my God. You see, despite captivity and enslavement, he became a Christian through Christ's calling. Don't be surprised when God actually does a work in somebody from circumstances that seem to have nothing to do with anything that's good, nothing to do with anything that's godly. In fact, John Mackay here today is a testament to that, in the fact that he became a Christian through God's calling after reading through the Bible, which started by reading a book by an atheist. It's amazing how God can work, and maybe John can comment on that at the end of it. So St. Patrick is taken as a slave to Ireland, where he receives Christ's calling, he realizes his sin in the midst of slavery, and he becomes a Christian. And eventually he returns back to England, and then he returns back to Ireland as a missionary this time. Never before did they know God. He's speaking of the Picts at this point, the Irish, right? The Scots, rather, the Irish. Never before did they know of God except to serve idols and unclean things. But now they have become the people of the Lord and are called the children of God. He was a missionary. He took the gospel to Ireland. He took the gospel to the Scots. And the remarkable thing about this is, if you find that there's lots and lots of evidence that the gospel was in Britannia during the Roman Empire, even slightly before St. Patrick. And there's a fabulous little article by Bill Cooper which talks about the early writing of the gospel and the early gospel here in Britannia, in what is now the United Kingdom. So it's fascinating stuff when you dig down into it a little bit. So he returned to Ireland as a missionary. He claimed that his captivity and enslavement was God's plan for bringing the gospel to the Irish, and he ended up establishing churches, he trained leaders, and he set up schools. So he was somebody who discipled as well as taught. What was his message? Well, this is what he actually wrote. I mean, I wonder if you can recognize where he got some of this information from. For there is no other God, he said, nor ever was before, nor shall be hereafter, but God the Father, unbegotten and without beginning, in whom all things began, whose are all things, as we have been taught. And his Son, Jesus Christ, who manifestly always existed with the Father before the beginning of time, in the Spirit with the Father, indescribably begotten before all things, and all things visible and invisible were made by him. I mean, this sounds a bit like John 1. It sounds a bit like Hebrews 1. It sounds a bit like Colossians 1. He really is basing this on the Bible. He was made man, this is speaking of Jesus, conquered death and was received into heaven to the Father, who gave him all power over every name in heaven and on earth and in hell, so that every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord and God, in whom we believe. Good message, good man. Patrick on the Trinity, yes, although the shamrock seems to have been a much later sort of myth attributed to St. Patrick, there's no evidence that he had anything to do with shamrocks. And we can talk a bit later about some of the other stories to do with Patrick, right? Like driving snakes out of Ireland and stuff like that. But let's actually look at what Patrick himself said on the Trinity. This is on a document known as St. Patrick's breastplate, which is traced back to being attributed to St. Patrick. He says this: I bind to myself today the strong virtue of the invocation of the Trinity. I believe the Trinity in the unity, the creator of the universe. And it goes on, the breastplate, to talk about God's power seen in nature, God's power seen in the things that he does, and how St. Patrick wants to have this intimate relationship with Jesus Christ, which he does so through the Spirit. So you can see you've got this doctrine of the Trinity even predating things like the Nicene Creed, simply because it's truth. It's taught all throughout Scripture, and it was understood by people like St. Patrick even before it became what you might refer to as formal doctrine. And the only reason it needed to become formal doctrine is because people had strayed so far from the truth in the beginning. So, there are a little bit of an interesting look at St. Patrick, some of the things that we actually know about him based on old and historical documentation, as opposed to some of the more sort of either Catholic or, certainly there's a lot of odd Hebrew roots, British Israelite type of stuff that goes on out there nowadays. But this is a really fascinating insight into the man St. Patrick and what he actually did.